You know, you look in the mirror and you chart the visible stuff, like a new gray hair, a slightly sharper jawline, or a wrinkle that just wasn't there last year.
Right, yeah.
And we are conditioned to track getting older purely by those physical markers we can actually see. But right now,
Mm.
under the surface, there is this incredibly complex, invisible architecture being built.
Mm.
It's being dismantled and rebuilt inside you. And it's happening every single day of your life. So today, you, the listener, are joining us on a mission to, well, to decode that architecture.
Exactly.
We are going to explore a foundational text on human development, specifically Chapter 3 from our curated psychology sources. And because this material really forms the bedrock at how we understand ourselves, we're taking a unique approach for this deep dive.
We really are, yeah.
We are going to read the original source text to you, paragraph by paragraph, exactly as it was written. And then we are going to translate that academic theory into the actual, mechanisms of your daily life. No skimming.
Right, no skipping the hard parts.
Exactly. We are getting into the why and the how of human existence.
And the overarching theme you're going to notice as we navigate this text is that development is not synonymous with just like simply growing up.
Right.
It is a lifelong, deeply interwoven collision of biology, cognition, and society. So the exact moment you think you are finished developing is the exact moment you misunderstand how your own mind and body function.
Man, that's a wild thought. Okay, I want to dive straight into the source. We'll start with the first block of original text, which defines what development actually means. I'm going to read it exactly as written, and you just jump in so I don't lose my breath here.
Will do.
Quote, when we think of development, invariably we think of physical changes, as these are commonly observed at home with younger siblings, with parents and grandparents, in school with peers or others around us.
Right.
From conception until the moment of death, we not only change physically, but we also change in the way we think, use language, and develop social relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that changes are not confined to any one area of a person's life. They occur in the person in an integrated manner. Development is the pattern of progressive, orderly, and predictable changes that begin at conception and continue throughout life.
Okay.
Development mostly involves changes both growth and decline as observed during old age. Development is influenced by an interplay of biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional processes.
Yeah, that interplay is key.
Development due to genes inherited from parents, such as in height and weight, brain, heart, and lungs development, etc., all point towards the role of biological processes.
Right, the physical stuff.
The role of cognitive processes in development relate to mental activities associated with the processes of knowing and experiencing, such as thought, perception, attention, problem-solving, etc. Socio-emotional processes that influence development refer to changes in an individual's interactions with other people, changes in emotions and in personality.
Yeah.
A child's hug to his mother, a young girl's affectionate gesture to her sibling, or an adolescent's sorrow at losing a match are all reflections of socio-emotional processes deeply involved in human development.
Mm-hmm.
Although you would be reading about the different processes in different chapters of this textbook, it is important to remember that the biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional processes are interwoven. These processes influence changes in the development of the individual as a whole throughout the human lifespan. End quote.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate.
Please, because the text establishes a triad here, right?
Yeah.
Biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional processes.
Yeah.
And it insists they are interwoven, but I feel like people often treat them as completely separate silos.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
And that is a fundamental error in how we view human psychology. The text explicitly states that changes occur in an integrated manner.
Right.
So if you experience a biological change, let's say a surge in testosterone or estrogen during puberty, that isn't just a physical event happening in a vacuum.
Oh, I see.
That biological reality instantly alters your cognitive process. It literally changes how your brain perceives risk or reward. And then that cognitive shift immediately alters your socio-emotional process. It changes how you interact with your parents or your friends. You cannot isolate the body from the mind or the mind from society.
I often think of this like a smartphone.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, the biological process is the physical hardware, right? It's the lithium battery, the glass screen, the silicon microchips you inherited from the manufacturer.
Right, the genetics.
Exactly. Then the cognitive process is the operating system. It's the actual software that's interpreting data, running problem-solving algorithms, managing attention and memory.
Okay, yeah. And the socio-emotional.
That would be the network connection.
Yeah.
It is how that specific device communicates over Wi-Fi with, billions of other devices in the whole digital ecosystem.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. Because if the battery, like the biology, starts degrading, the processor, the cognition starts to slow down. And if the processor slows down, the network connection, the socio-emotional interaction, starts lagging and dropping calls.
That perfectly captures the mechanism the text is describing. A decline in one area necessitates a shift in the others. Think of a toddler's physical inability to speak clearly.
Oh, sure.
That's a biological limitation, right? Their vocal cords and brain haven't synced up, but that biological limit leads to intense socio-emotional frustration when they can't communicate what they want. It is a constant, lifelong feedback loop.
That makes so much sense. Now, there is a critical clarification the text makes next in box 3.1 regarding the terminology we use. I'm going to read this original text now.
Go for it.
Quote, growth refers to an increase in the size of body parts or of the organism as a whole. It can be measured or quantified, for example, growth in height, weight, etc. Development is a process by which an individual grows and changes throughout the life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The term development applies to the changes that have a direction and hold definite relationship with what precedes it, and in turn will determine what will come after.
Mm-hmm.
A temporary change caused by a brief illness, for example, is not considered a part of development. All changes which occur as a result of development are not of the same kind.
Okay.
Thus, changes in size, physical growth, changes in proportion, child to adult, changes in features, disappearance of baby teeth, and acquiring new features are varied in their pace and scope level. Development includes growth as one of its aspects.
Right, that's the umbrella term.
Maturation refers to the changes that follow an orderly sequence and are largely dictated by the genetic blueprint which produces commonalities in our growth and development.
Pay attention to that word, blueprint.
Quote, for example, most children can sit without support by 7 months of age, stand with support by 8 months, and walk by 1 year. Once the underlying physical structure is sufficiently developed, proficiency in these behaviors requires adequate environment and little practice.
Yeah.
However, special efforts to accelerate these behaviors do not help if the infant is naturationally not ready. These processes seem to unfold from within, following an inner, genetically determined timetable that is characteristic of the species.
That's fascinating.
Quote, evolution refers to species-specific changes. Natural selection is an evolutionary process that favors individuals or a species that are best adapted to survive and reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
The evolutionary changes are passed from one generation to the next within a species. Evolution proceeds at a very slow pace. Emergence of human beings from great apes took about 14 million years. It has been estimated that the Homo sapiens came into existence only about 50,000 years ago, end quote.
Okay, so the author here is drawing very hard boundaries around 4 words that we honestly just lazily swap for each other in casual conversation. Growth, development, maturation, and evolution.
Yeah, I totally do that. I mean, I see the distinction for growth. It's strictly quantitative. It's basically a tape measure and a bathroom scale.
Exactly.
But I want to push back on maturation versus development. If maturation is an orderly sequence dictated by genetics, how is that conceptually different from development? Aren't they the same thing?
It's a great question. It really comes down to the source of the trigger. Maturation is basically a biological alarm clock. It is entirely genetically pre-programmed.
Okay.
The text gives the example of a baby walking. You can hire the absolute best physical therapist on earth to train a 3-month-old baby to walk, but the baby will fail.
Wow, really?
Yeah, why? Because the myelin sheath, the fatty tissue that insulates the nerves in their legs, hasn't biologically thickened enough to carry the required electrical signals from the brain. The environment cannot force maturation. It literally unfolds from within on a very strict schedule.
Oh, I see. So development, however, is the broader umbrella.
Yes, exactly. Development includes a maturation, but it also includes changes driven by your environment, your choices, and your experiences.
Okay, so maturation is the genetic hard coding, while development is the entire lifelong narrative, which includes the environment. And then we have evolution, which, zooming way out, the text notes took 14 million years from great apes and 50,000 years for modern Homo sapiens.
Right. Evolution is just development applied to a whole species over an incomprehensible timeline.
That makes perfect sense. And that framework sets us up for a major academic theory outlined in the text, the lifespan perspective, or LSP.
Yes, the LSP.
The text lists 7 specific assumptions here. I'm going to read the exact text for these 7 points. Quote, the study of development, according to the lifespan perspective, LSP, includes the following assumptions. 1. Development is lifelong, i.e. it takes place across all age groups, starting from conception to old age. It includes both gains and losses, which interact in dynamic, change in one aspect goes with changes in others, ways throughout the lifespan.
Okay, so lifelong.
Quote, 2. The various processes of human development, i.e. biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional, are interwoven in the development of a person throughout the lifespan. 3. Development is multidirectional. Some dimensions or components of a given dimension of development may increase, while others show decrement.
Right.
Quote, for example, the experiences of adults may make them wiser and guide their decisions. However, with an increase in age, one's performance is likely to decrease on tasks requiring speed, such as running.
Makes sense.
4. Development is highly plastic, i.e. within person. Modifiability is found in psychological development, though plasticity varies among individuals. This means skills and abilities can be improved or developed throughout the lifespan.
We'll definitely come back to that one.
Quote, 5. Development is influenced by historical conditions. For example, the experiences of 20-year-olds who lived through the freedom struggle in India would be very different from the experiences of 20-year-olds of today. The career orientation of school students today is very different from those students who were in schools 50 years ago.
Context matters, yeah.
Quote, 6. Development is the concern of a number of disciplines. Different disciplines like psychology, anthropology, sociology, and neurosciences study human development, each trying to provide answers to development throughout the lifespan. Quote, 7. An individual responds and acts on contexts, which include what was inherited, the physical environment, social, historical, and cultural contexts. For example, the life events in everyone's life are not the same, such as death of a parent, accident, earthquake, etc., affect the course of one's life, as also the positive influences, such as winning an award or getting a good job. People keep on changing with changing contexts. End quote.
You know, these 7 assumptions fundamentally revolutionized psychology.
Really? How so?
Well, for a really long time, the scientific consensus was that development basically stopped at age 25.
Wait, really?
Just stopped.
Yeah.
You grew up, your brain finished wiring itself, and then you just sort of existed until you declined. The lifespan perspective absolutely obliterated that idea.
I am particularly fascinated by the third point in there. The development is multidirectional. The idea that aging isn't just, a universal downward slope.
Yeah, exactly.
The text explicitly says some dimensions increase while others show decrement. It contrasts physical running speed with wisdom.
Yeah.
But what is the actual mechanism there? Why does wisdom go up while the physical body breaks down?
It has a lot to do with how the brain organizes information over time. As you age, your processing speed, which psychologists call fluid intelligence, the ability to solve novel problems quickly, does peak and then decline.
Okay.
That fluid intelligence is the mental equivalent of running speed. However, your crystallized intelligence, which is the vast library of past experiences, pattern recognition, and social nuances, that continues to expand.
Oh, wow.
So you aren't processing brand new information as fast, but you are cross-referencing it against decades of accumulated data. That dense, massive web of connections is what we call wisdom. So development goes down in speed, but it goes way up in depth.
That is super interesting. And that directly connects to the fourth point, plasticity.
Yeah.
The text says plasticity means skills and abilities can be improved throughout the lifespan.
Yes.
But let's be incredibly clear for the listener here. Is the text really suggesting that an 80-year-old brain is as adaptable as an 8-year-old brain? Because neurologically, that sounds impossible.
You are absolutely right to be skeptical, and the text actually includes a subtle caveat there. Plasticity varies among individuals.
Ah, okay.
An 80-year-old brain does not have the same raw, sponge-like neuroplasticity as a child's brain. A child is actively pruning millions of synapses a day. However, the core assumption of the LSP is that the capacity for modifiability never drops to zero.
So you can still change.
Exactly. An older adult can absolutely still forge new neural pathways to learn a language, adopt a radically different political worldview, or develop entirely new emotional coping strategies. The hardware might be older, but the operating system can always be rewritten.
That's incredibly hopeful, honestly. And the operating system is rewritten by the context it finds itself in, which hits those fifth and seventh assumptions: historical conditions and contextual life events.
Right.
To make this concrete, think about the generation that came of age during the COVID-19 pandemic versus a generation that came of age during an economic boom. The historical condition fundamentally alters the socio-emotional development of millions of people simultaneously.
That is a perfect example.
It completely changes how they perceive risk, community, and authority.
Exactly. Which smoothly transitions us into one of the most fiercely debated topics in the entire history of science, nature versus nurture.
Oh boy, the big one.
Yeah. How much of our development is determined by genetics and how much by our environment?
Let me read the original text on the factors influencing development. Quote, have you observed in your class that some of you have dark skin, others have light-colored skins? Color of your hair and eyes are different. Some of you are tall, others short. Some are quiet or sad, while others are talkative or cheerful. People also differ with respect to intelligence, learning abilities, memory, and other psychological characteristics besides physical characteristics. Despite these variations, no one can be mistaken for any other species. We all are Homo sapiens.
Right.
What causes us to be different from each other, but at the same time more like each other? The answer lies in the interaction of heredity and environment. You've already learned that the principles of heredity explain the mechanism for transmission of characteristics by every species from one generation to the next.
Okay.
We inherit genetic codes from our parents, which are in every cell of our body. Our genetic codes are alike in one important way. They contain the human genetic code. It is because of the human genetic code that a fertilized human egg grows into a human baby and cannot grow into an elephant, a bird, or a mouse.
Makes sense.
Genetic transmission is very complex. Most characteristics that we observe in humans are combinations of larger number of genes. You can imagine the combinations produced by 80,000 or more genes, accounting for a variety of characteristics and behaviors.
It's staggering.
It is also not possible to possess all the characteristics made available to us by our genetic structure. The actual genetic material, or a person's genetic heritage, is known as genotype.
Genotype, remember that term.
However, not all of this genetic material is apparent or distinctly identifiable in our observable characteristics. Phenotype is the way an individual's genotype is expressed in observable and measurable characteristics.
And phenotype, yeah.
Phenotypes include physical traits such as height, weight, eye, and skin color, and many of the psychological characteristics such as intelligence, creativity, and personality. These observable characteristics of an individual are the result of the interaction between the person's inherited traits and the environment.
Okay.
It is the genetic code which predisposes a child to develop in a particular way. Genes provide a distinct blueprint and timetable for the development of an individual. But genes do not exist in isolation, and development occurs within the context of an individual's environment. This is what makes each one of us a unique person. What are the environmental influences? How does the environment affect development? Imagine a child with genotype that predisposes her to be introverted in an environment that promotes social interaction and extroversion. The influence of such an environment may make the child a little extroverted. Let us take another example. An individual with short height genes, even if she is in a very good nutritional environment, will never be able to be taller than average. This shows that genes set the limit, and within that limit, the environment influences development.
That's a huge concept.
Quote, you know by now that parents provide the genes for the child's development. Do you know that they also play an important role in determining the type of environment their children will encounter? Sandra Scar, 1992, believes that the environment parents provide for their children depends to some extent on their own genetic predisposition.
Okay, listen to this part closely.
For example, if parents are intelligent and are good readers, they would provide their children with books to read, with the likely outcome that their children will become good readers who enjoy reading. A child's own genotype, what she has inherited, such as being cooperative and attentive, is likely to result in teachers and parents giving more pleasant response as compared to children who are not cooperative or not attentive. Besides these, children themselves choose certain environments based on their genotype. For example, because of their genotype, children may perform well in music or sports, and they will seek and spend more time in environments, which will enable them to perform their musical skills. Similarly, an athlete would seek sports-related environment.
Makes total sense.
These interactions with environment keep changing from infancy through adolescence. Environmental influences are as complex as the genes we inherit. End quote.
Okay, so the mechanism described here basically resolves the old nature versus nurture debate by declaring a tie.
Right. It's both.
Exactly.
That's kind
It introduces two vital scientific terms, genotype and phenotype. Your genotype is the raw, invisible genetic blueprint locked inside your DNA. But just because you have a gene doesn't mean it actually gets activated.
Okay, so what activates it?
The environment. And the phenotype is the physical or psychological trait that actually manifests in reality as a result of that interaction.
You know, the analogy that always helps me is thinking of the genotype as a massive architectural blueprint for a house.
Ooh, I like this.
Right. And the phenotype is the actual house that gets built. So the blueprint might call for a towering 3-story mansion.
Mm-hmm.
But if the builders, which represent your environment, only have enough bricks and wood to build a 1-story cottage, you get a cottage.
Exactly.
The text uses height as an example. If your genotype dictates short genes, you have a firm ceiling. But if you suffer from malnutrition, a poor environment, you might not even reach that short ceiling. The genes set the boundaries. The environment determines where you land inside those boundaries.
And this leads to a really fascinating implication in the text regarding intelligence and personality.
What's that?
Well, if genetics set the ceiling for physical height, it implies they also set a biological perimeter for cognitive capacities. But the environment determines whether those cognitive capacities are ever fully realized.
Wow. I want to isolate what the text is saying about the researcher Sandra Scar here, because this completely flips how we usually think about our environment.
It really does.
We usually think of our environment as something that just passively happens to us.
Yeah.
But Scar argues that our genes actively construct our environment.
Yes.
The text outlines 3 ways this happens, starting with parents. If your parents have genes that predispose them to high reading comprehension, they pass those genes to you. But they also fill their house with books. So you weren't just getting nature, you're getting an environment tailor-made to amplify that specific nature.
It's a double dose. And the second mechanism the text notes is how a child's genotype evokes responses from the environment. A genetically cooperative child naturally draws warmer, more attentive responses from teachers.
Oh, so their biology triggers a better environment for them to learn in.
Precisely. And the third is active selection. A child with a genetic predisposition for, say, fast-twitch muscle fibers will naturally excel at sprinting. Because they excel, they enjoy it, and they actively seek out sports environments, which further hones those biological traits.
Oh, wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If my genes dictate the environment my parents provide, and my genes dictate how strangers treat me, and my genes dictate the hobbies I actively choose to pursue, doesn't that suggest our environment is just a puppet controlled by our biology? Does this completely diminish the idea of free will in our own development?
Oh, that is a profound philosophical question. And within the bounds of this text, the answer is a complex no.
Okay, why?
Because environmental influences, as the text concludes, are just as complex as genes. Economic collapse, a war, or a completely random accident can absolutely shatter the environment a person's genes were attempting to build.
I see.
A child might have the genetic predisposition to seek out musical environments, right? But if they are born into a socioeconomic context where instruments simply don't exist, that genetic potential remains entirely dormant.
That is heavy, which is actually a perfect segue into how psychologists literally map out these environmental contexts. We're going to look at 2 different ecological models. I'll read the text on Uri Bronfenbrenner's model first.
Sounds good.
Quote, "Development does not take place in a vacuum. It is always embedded in a particular sociocultural context. As you shall read in this chapter, transition during one's lifetime, such as entering school, becoming an adolescent, finding jobs, marrying, having children, retirement, etc., all are joint functions of the biological changes and changes in one's environment.
Okay.
The environment can change or alter during any time of the individual's lifespan." Uri Bronfenbrenner's contextual view of development emphasizes the role of environmental factors in the development of an individual. This has been depicted in Figure 3.1.
The famous circles.
Yes. Quote, "The microsystem is the immediate environment setting in which the individual lives. It is in these settings where the child directly interacts with social agents, the family, peers, teachers, and neighborhood.
That's the first level.
The mesosystem consists of relations between these contexts. For instance, how a child's parents relate to the teachers, or how the parents view the adolescent's friends, are experiences likely to influence an individual's relationships with others.
Right.
The exosystem includes events in social settings where the child does not participate directly, but they influence the child's experiences in the immediate context. For example, the transfer of father or mother may cause tension among the parents, which might affect their interactions with the child or the general amenities available to the child, like quality schooling, libraries, medical care, means of entertainment, etc. Macrosystem includes the culture in which the individual lives. Chronosystem involves events in the individual's life course and socio-historical circumstances of the time, such as divorce of parents or parents' economic setback, and their effect on the child.
So that's the big picture and time.
Quote, in a nutshell, Bronfenbrenner's view is that a child's development is significantly affected by the complex world that envelops her/him, whether it be the minutiae of the conversations she has with her playmates or the social and economic life circumstances into which she is born.
Yeah.
Research has shown that children in impoverished environments have unstimulating environment devoid of books, magazines, toys, etc., lack experiences such as visits to library, museum, zoo, etc., have parents who are ineffective as role models, and live in overcrowded and noisy surroundings. As a result of these conditions, children are at a disadvantage and has difficulties in learning. End quote.
Okay, so Bronfenbrenner's model is often visualized as a series of Russian nesting dolls, one layered inside the next.
Oh, I love that image.
It is a brilliant way to map the unseen forces shaping a life. The innermost doll is the microsystem. This is the tangible, immediate world, the actual physical faces the child sees every single day. Their parents, their siblings, their school teachers.
Okay, and the next all out is the mesosystem, right? Which I think requires a slight perspective shift.
Yes, how so?
Well, it isn't a new group of people. It is the relationship between the people in the microsystem. Like, if your parents have a deeply respectful relationship with your teachers, that positive friction in the mesosystem elevates your development.
Exactly.
But if your parents violently disagree with your peer group, that toxic friction harms you. It's the invisible web connecting your immediate circles.
That's a great way to put it. Then we step further back to the exosystem. The mechanism here is entirely indirect influence. The child does not participate in the exosystem, but they absolutely feel its shockwaves.
Like the parent's job transfer that Tex mentioned.
Right, but let's modernize that. Imagine a parent's company gets bought out by a private equity firm, resulting in massive layoffs and severe financial stress for the parent.
Oof, yeah.
The child has never been to the corporate office, they've never met the boss, but the stress from that exosystem bleeds directly into the home microsystem. It fundamentally alters the child's sense of security.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then surrounding all of that is the macro system, which is the broad cultural values, economic systems, and laws of the society you live in.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, encompassing everything is the chronosystem, the dimension of time. A global recession hitting when a child is 2 years old has a vastly different developmental impact than a recession hitting when they are 22 and trying to enter the job market.
Right. Timing is everything. And to understand how these models adapt to different cultural realities, the text actually introduces a second framework designed specifically for the Indian context by Durgan and Sinha.
Let me read that text now. Quote, Durganand Sinha, 1977, has presented an ecological model for understanding the development of children in Indian context. Ecology of the child could be viewed in terms of two concentric layers.
Okay, 2 layers.
The upper and the more visible layers consist of home, school, peer groups, and so on. The most important ecological factors influencing development of the child in the visible upper layer constitute the home, its conditions in terms of overcrowding, space available to each member, toys, technological devices used, etc.
Right.
Nature and quality of schooling, facilities to which the child is exposed, and 3, nature of interactions and activities undertaken with peer groups from childhood onwards. These factors do not operate independently but constantly interact with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Since these are also embedded in a larger and a more pervasive setting, the surrounding layers of the child's ecology constantly influence the upper layer factors. However, their influences are not always clearly visible.
Okay, the invisible forces again.
Quote, the elements of the surrounding layer of ecology constitute the general geographical environment. It includes space and facilities for play and other activities available outside the home, including general congestion of the locality and density of population.
Yeah.
2, institutional setting, provided by caste, class, and other factors. And 3, general amenities available to the child, like drinking water, electricity, means of entertainment, and so on.
Notice the focus on amenities.
The visible and the surrounding layer factors interact with one another and may have different consequences for development in different people. The ecological environment can change or alter during any time of the individual's lifespan. Therefore, to understand differences in the functioning of an individual, it is important to see the individual in the context of his experiences. End quote.
So Sinha basically compresses the huge complexity of Bronfenbrenner down to two highly practical concentric layers. He divides the world into what is immediately visible and what surrounds and dictates that visible reality.
Right. The visible upper layer tracks very closely to Bronfenbrenner's microsystem. It's the physical reality of the home. But Senya focuses really heavily on physical conditions, like
Mm.
is the home overcrowded? Are there technological devices? What is the literal physical space available to each family member?
And that focus is absolutely crucial when looking at developing nations or densely populated areas,
Hmm.
because the surrounding layers in Sinha's model press down aggressively on that visible layer. Sinha explicitly names public amenities like drinking water and electricity.
I'm looking at this and thinking about the mechanism of stress.
Yeah.
If a child's surrounding layer lacks reliable electricity or clean drinking water, the cognitive load on the family just to survive is immense.
Oh, absolutely.
That surrounding layer of structural insecurity permeates the visible layer of the home. It transforms how parents interact with their children. I mean, a parent spending 4 hours a day securing water simply cannot spend 4 hours a day engaged in the cognitive development of their toddler. The macro dictates the micro.
That is spot on, which is why both models arrive at the exact same conclusion. Evaluating a child's psychological development in total isolation without mapping their ecology is scientifically useless.
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
Now we are going to trace the actual timeline of human life through this ecology.
Yeah.
The text organizes development into specific stages. I'll read the introductory text for this.
Okay.
Quote, development is commonly described in terms of periods or stages. You must have observed that your younger brother or sister or parents, and even yourself, all behave in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
If you observe people living in your neighborhood, you would find that they too do not behave in a similar manner. This variation is partly because everyone is in a different stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
Human life proceeds through different stages.
Right.
For example, you are at present in the stage of adolescence, and after a few years you will enter the stage of adulthood. Developmental stages are assumed to be temporary and are often characterized by a dominant feature or a leading characteristic, which gives each period its uniqueness. During a particular stage, individual progresses towards an assumed goal, a state or ability that she must achieve in the same order as other persons before progressing to the next stage in the sequence. Of course, individuals do vary with respect to the time or rate of development from one stage to another.
Yeah, everyone goes at their own pace.
Quote, it may be noted that certain patterns of behavior and certain skills are learned more easily and successfully during certain stages. These accomplishments of a person become the social expectations of that stage of development. They are known as developmental tasks. End quote.
The critical concept introduced here is the developmental task.
Okay, what exactly is that?
A developmental task is essentially a social and biological checklist. Society looks at your biological age and imposes a set of expectations on what you should be able to accomplish by that point.
Oh, I see. So if you are an infant, the developmental task is learning to walk and speak.
Yeah.
If you are in early adulthood, the task is securing a career and forming intimate relationships. And if you fail to achieve these tasks in the expected sequence, society exerts pressure, which alters your socio-emotional development.
Precisely. And the very first stage begins before you even enter society.
The prenatal stage. Let me read the text. Quote, the period from conception to birth is known as the prenatal period. Typically, it lasts for about 40 weeks. You know by now that the genetic blueprint guides our development during the prenatal period and after birth.
Mm-hmm.
Both genetic and environmental factors affect our development during different periods of prenatal stage. Prenatal development is also affected by maternal characteristics, which include mother's age, nutrition, and emotional state. Disease or infection carried by the mother can adversely affect prenatal development. For example, rubella, German measles, genital herpes, and human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, are believed to cause genetic problems in the newborn. Another source of threat to prenatal development is teratogens, environmental agents that cause deviations in normal development that can lead to serious abnormalities or death.
Teratogen.
Common teratogens include drugs, infections, radiations, and pollution. Intake of drugs, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, etc., alcohol, tobacco, etc., by women during pregnancy may have harmful effects on the fetus and increase the frequency of congenital abnormalities.
Right.
Radiations, such as X-rays, and certain chemicals near industrial areas can cause permanent change in the genes. Environmental pollutants and toxic wastes like carbon monoxide, mercury, and lead are also sources of danger to the unborn child. End quote.
This section completely shatters a very common misconception. We tend to view the womb as this impenetrable magical shield where genetics operate in total isolation, but the text makes it explicitly clear that the environment is deeply active during these 40 weeks.
Yeah, the text introduces a really frightening word here, teratogens, environmental agents that cause deviations in normal development. It lists drugs, alcohol, tobacco, infections like rubella, and industrial pollutants like radiation, mercury, and carbon monoxide. But I really want to understand the actual mechanism here.
Sure.
How do environmental chemicals in the mother's lungs or stomach literally rewrite the genetic development of a fetus?
The mechanism completely relies on the placenta. The placenta is an organ that connects the developing fetus to the uterine wall to allow nutrient uptake and gas exchange. But, and this is key, the placenta is not a solid wall. It is a semi-permeable filter.
Okay, so things can get through.
Yes, it allows microscopic nutrients like oxygen and glucose to pass from the mother's blood to the baby's blood. The danger is that the molecules of certain teratogens, like alcohol or carbon monoxide, are small enough to slip right through that filter.
Oh, wow.
Once they cross that placental barrier, they interfere directly with the incredibly delicate, rapid cellular division happening in the fetus. They can literally misdirect the genetic instructions, causing organs to form incorrectly or altering brain architecture permanently.
So the environment is literally in the bloodstream before the child even takes their first breath.
Exactly.
And once they do take that breath, they enter infancy. This text is quite dense, breaking down motor, sensory, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. I'm going to read the text on motor and sensory development first, which also summarizes Table 3.1 regarding reflexes.
Okay.
Quote, "The brain develops at an amazing rate before and after birth. You have already read about the parts of the brain and the important role played by cerebrum in human functions, such as language, perception, and intelligence. Just before birth, the newborns have most but not all brain cells. The neural connections among these cells develop at a rapid rate. The newborn is not as helpless as you might think. The activities needed to sustain life functions are present in the newborn. It breathes, sucks, swallows, and discharges the bodily wastes. The newborns, in their first week of life, are able to indicate what direction a sound is coming from, can distinguish their mother's voice from the voices of other women, and can imitate simple gestures like tongue protrusion and mouth opening.
Wow.
Motor development. The newborn's movements are governed by reflexes which are automatic, built-in responses to stimuli. They are genetically carried survival mechanisms and are the building blocks for subsequent motor development.
Reflexes.
Before the newborns have had the opportunity to learn, reflexes act as adaptive mechanisms. Some reflexes present in the newborn coughing, blinking, and yawning persist throughout their lives. Others disappear as the brain functions mature and voluntary control over behavior starts developing.
Right, they fade out.
Quote, "As the brain is developing, physical development also progresses. As the infant grows, the muscles and nervous system mature, which lead to the development of finer skills. Basic physical motor skills include grasping and reaching for objects, sitting, crawling, walking, and running. The sequence of physical motor development is universal, with minor exceptions.
Okay.
Sensory abilities. You know by now that newborns are not as incompetent as they look. They can recognize their mother's voice just a few hours after birth and have other sensory capabilities. How well can infants see? Newborns prefer to look at some stimuli rather than others, such as faces, although these preferences change over the first few months of life. The newborn's vision is estimated to be lower than the adult vision. By 6 months, it improves, and by about the first year, vision is almost the same as that of an adult, 20/20. Can a newborn see color? The current consensus is that they might be able to distinguish between red and white colors, but in general, they are color deficient, and full color vision develops by 3 months of age. For context, Table 3.1 lists specific reflexes. The rooting reflex, where a baby turns its head when touched on the cheek. The Moro reflex, throwing arms out to a loud noise. The grasp reflex, and the Babinski reflex, where toes fan out when the foot is stroked." End quote.
The primary takeaway here is that a newborn is definitely not a blank slate. They arrive preloaded with firmware.
Right.
The text calls these reflexes genetically carried survival mechanisms.
The mechanism of a reflex is fascinating to me because it bypasses higher-level cognitive thought completely.
It does, yeah.
Like when a baby experiences the Moro reflex, throwing their arms out in response to a loud noise or a feeling of falling, they aren't thinking, "Oh, I'm falling, I should brace myself."
Right. There's no time for that.
Exactly. That electrical signal doesn't even make it to the conscious part of the brain. The spinal cord and lower brain instantly fire the muscles to react. It is pure evolutionary biology.
And as the higher regions of the brain, the cerebrum, mature, they start to override these primitive reflexes. The baby learns voluntary control, and things like the rooting or grasp reflex just disappear.
I am also really struck by the sensory limitations. A newborn actively prefers looking at faces, but they are essentially color deficient. They can't see full color until 3 months of age. Why is that?
It is entirely a matter of anatomical maturation. The retina in the eye contains cells called cones, which are responsible for color vision. At birth, these cones are simply immature and haven't fully formed the neural connections to the visual cortex in the back of the brain.
Oh, I see.
Over the first 3 months, stimulated by light and visual input, those pathways solidify, and the world slowly fades from high-contrast blurry shapes into full color.
So the hardware is literally actively configuring itself while the baby is awake.
Exactly.
Now, how does a baby actually think during this time? I'll read the text on cognitive development. Quote, cognitive development. Does a 3-year-old child understand things the same way as would an 8-year-old? Jean Piaget stressed that children actively construct their understanding of the world. Information does not simply enter their minds from the environment.
Piaget, yeah. Very important.
As children grow, additional information is acquired, and they adapt their thinking to include new ideas, as this improves their understanding of the world. Piaget believed that a child's mind passes through a series of stages of thought from infancy to adolescence.
Stages, right.
Each stage is characterized by a distinct way of thinking and is age-related. It is important to remember that it is the different way of thinking which makes one stage more advanced than the other, and not the amount of information. This also shows why you, at your age, think differently from an 8-year-old.
Okay, quality, not just quantity.
Quote, the child during infancy, i.e. the first 2 years of life, experiences the world through senses and interactions with objects, through looking, hearing, touching, mouthing, and grasping. The newborn lives in the present. What is out of sight is out of mind. For example, if you hide the toy in front of the child with which the child has been playing, the young infant would react as if nothing has happened, i.e. she will not search for the toy. The child assumes the toy does not exist.
Wow.
According to Piaget, children at this stage do not go beyond their immediate sensory experience, i.e. lack object permanence. The awareness that the objects continue to exist were not perceived. Gradually, by 8 months of age, the child starts pursuing the object partially covered in his presence. End quote.
We are introduced here to Jean Piaget, one of the most influential figures in developmental psychology. Prior to Piaget, many scientists viewed children as basically passive vessels just waiting to be filled with information.
Right.
But Piaget proposed that children are actually little scientists. They actively construct knowledge by experimenting on the world around them.
The text highlights a crucial distinction here. A child doesn't just have less information than an adult. They process information in a fundamentally different way. Piaget calls infancy the sensorimotor stage. They learn entirely through physical interaction, mouthing, touching, grasping.
Which brings us to Piaget's most famous concept, object permanence. The text states that for a young infant, what is out of sight is literally out of mind. If you hide a toy under a blanket, they don't look for it because, to their cognitive architecture, the toy has ceased to exist.
You know, I always explain object permanence by comparing it to how a video game engine renders a world.
Oh, that's a cool way to look at it.
Right. If you were playing a video game and your character turns away from a building, the computer actually stops rendering that building to save processing power. To the computer, if you aren't looking at it, it isn't there.
Yes.
That is a baby's brain. They haven't developed the neural capacity to hold a symbolic representation of an object in their working memory. It takes about 8 months of neurological maturation before they realize the world exists independently of their own perception. Peekaboo isn't just a fun game for an infant. It is a mind-bending manipulation of reality.
That is an incredibly accurate way to visualize it. Now, as they're constructing reality, they're also constructing their first social bonds.
Let me read the text on socio-emotional development. Quote, socio-emotional development. Babies from birth are social creatures. An infant starts preferring familiar faces and responds to parents' presence by cooing and gurgling. They become more mobile by 6 to 8 months of age and start showing a preference for their mother's company. When frightened by a new face, or when separated from their mother, they cry or show distress. On being reunited with the parent or caregiver, they reciprocate with smiles or hugs. The close emotional bond of affection that develop between infants and their parents, caregivers, is called attachment.
Attachment.
In a classic study by Harlow and Harlow, 1962, baby monkeys were separated from their mothers approximately 8 hours after birth. The baby monkeys were placed in experimental chambers and reared for 6 months by surrogate substitute mothers, one made of wire and the other of cloth.
The famous monkey study.
Half the baby monkeys were fed by the wire mother, half by the cloth mother. Regardless of whether they were fed by the wire or the cloth mother, the baby monkeys showed a preference for the cloth mother and spent a lot more time with her.
Right.
This study clearly demonstrates that providing nourishment or feeding was not crucial for attachment, and contact comfort is important. You too may have seen young children having a strong attachment to a favorite toy or blanket. There is nothing unusual in this, as the children know that the blanket or toy is not their mother, yet it provides them comfort. As children grow and become more sure of themselves, they abandon these objects. Human babies also form an attachment with their parents or caregivers who consistently and appropriately reciprocate to their signals of love and affection.
Okay.
According to Eric Erikson, 1968, the first year of life is the key time for the development of attachment. It represents the stage of developing trust or mistrust. A sense of trust is built on a feeling of physical comfort, which builds an expectation of the world as a secure and good place.
Trust versus mistrust.
An instant sense of trust is developed by responsive and sensitive parenting. If the parents are sensitive, affectionate, and accepting, it provides the infant a strong base to explore the environment. Such infants are likely to develop a secure attachment.
Right.
On the other hand, if parents are insensitive and show dissatisfaction and find fault with the child, it can lead to creating feelings of self-doubt in the child. Securely attached infants respond positively when picked up, move freely, and play, whereas insecurely attached infants feel anxious when separated and cry due to fear and get upset.
Yeah.
A close, interactive relationship with warm and affectionate adults is a child's first step towards healthy development. End quote.
This section outlines the mechanism of attachment, and we really must put the Harlow monkey experiment into historical context to understand why it is so profound.
Why is that?
Because before Harlow in 1962, the dominant psychological theories, both behaviorism and Freudian psychoanalysis, argued that a baby only bonded with a mother because she was the source of food. It was viewed as a purely transactional biological calculation.
This calories, basically.
Yes. But Harlow proved that was completely false. The baby monkeys were offered a wire mother that dispensed milk and a soft cloth mother that offered no food. The monkeys chose the cloth mother. They would only go to the wire mother when starving and then immediately run back to the cloth mother.
That's heartbreaking, honestly.
It is. But it proved there is a deep biological imperative for contact comfort that supersedes even the drive for calories. Love essentially is not just about survival. It is a neurological requirement for feeling safe.
And this translates directly to human infants. The text connects this to the theorist Eric Erikson, who argued that the first year of life represents the psychological stage of trust versus mistrust.
Right.
If we translate that from academic speak, Erikson is saying that a baby is using its caregivers to run an algorithm on how the universe works.
Yes, exactly.
Right? If the parents are responsive and sensitive, if they provide that contact comfort when the baby cries, the baby's brain wires itself to believe the world is safe. If I'm in distress, help will come. That creates a secure attachment. But if the parents are insensitive or angry, the algorithm determines the world is hostile. I am on my own. That creates a deep-seated mistrust and an insecure attachment.
That's spot on. And the text notes that a secure base allows the infant to explore the environment freely, which is essential for that cognitive development Piaget was talking about earlier. You just can't be a little scientist if you are terrified of the laboratory.
That secure base becomes essential as the infant transitions into childhood. I'm going to read the text on the physical development of childhood now.
Sounds good.
Quote, "The child's growth slows down during early childhood as compared to infancy. The child develops physically, gains height and weight, learns to walk, runs, jumps, and plays with the ball. Socially, the child's world expands from the parents to the family and adults near home and at school.
Right.
The child also begins to acquire the concepts of good and bad, i.e., develops a sense of morality. During childhood, children have increased physical capacities, can perform tasks independently, can set goals, and meet adult expectations. The increasing maturation of the brain, along with the opportunities to experience the world, contribute to development of children's cognitive abilities.
Nice.
Physical development. Early development follows two principles. 1, development precedes cephalocaudally, i.e. from the cephalic or head region to the caudal or tail region.
Cephalocaudally. Big word.
Quote, children gain control over the upper part of the body before the lower part. This is why you would notice that the infant's head is proportionately larger than his body during early infancy. Or, if you see an infant crawling, she will use the arms first and then shift to using the legs.
Right.
Quote, growth proceeds from the center of body and moves towards the extremities or more distal regions, the proximodistal trend, i.e., children gain control over their torso before their extremities. Initially, infants reach for objects by turning their entire body. Gradually, they extend their arms to reach for things. These changes are the result of a maturing nervous system, and not because of any limitation, since even visually impaired children show the same sequence, end quote. And the text also refers to Table 3.3 regarding the refinement of gross and fine motor skills.
Okay, so we encounter two dense anatomical terms here, cephalocaudal and proximodistal. They describe the universal sequence of physical mastery.
Right. Cephalocaudal basically means development proceeds from the head down to the tail, or toes. A baby controls their neck, then their arms, then finally their legs to walk. But why? What is the actual mechanism that forces this specific sequence? Why couldn't a baby learn to kick a ball before they learned to hold their head up?
It is entirely dictated by the nervous system. The brain is the command center, right? And the spinal cord carries the signals down. The nerves closest to the brain, the ones controlling the head, neck, and upper torso myelinate and mature first.
Oh, I see.
The electrical signals physically cannot travel effectively all the way down to the legs until the pathways closer to the brain are fully secured. The biology literally forces the sequence.
And the same logic applies to the proximodistal trend, which means growth moves from the center of the body out to the extremities. You control your core, then your shoulders, then your arms, and finally, your delicate fingertips.
Exactly. And once that physical control is established, they begin manipulating their environment in far more complex ways, which leads us to the next stage of cognitive development.
Let me read the text on cognitive changes in childhood. Quote, cognitive development. The child's ability to acquire the concept of object permanence enables for him to use mental symbols to represent objects. However, the child at this stage lacks the ability that allows him to do mentally what was done physically before. Cognitive development in early childhood focuses on Piaget's stage of preoperational thought. The child gains the ability to mentally represent an object that is not physically present. You may have observed children draw designs, figures to represent people, trees, dog, house, etc. This ability of the child to engage in symbolic thought helps to expand his mental world.
Symbolic thought, yes.
The progress in symbolic thought continues. A salient feature of preoperational thought is egocentrism, self-focus, i.e., children see the world only in terms of their own selves and are not able to appreciate others' point of view.
Egocentrism.
Children, because of egocentrism, engage in animism, thinking that all things are living, like oneself. They attribute lifelike qualities to inanimate objects. For example, if a child while running slips on the road, she might share animism by saying, "Road hurt me."
Animism, right.
As children grow and are approximately between 4 and 7 years of age, they want answers to all their questions like, why is the sky blue? How do trees grow? And so on. Such questions help the child to know why things are as they are. Piaget called this the stage of intuitive thought.
Okay.
Another feature of thought during preoperational stage is characterized by children having a tendency for centration, i.e. focusing on a single characteristic or feature for understanding an event. For example, a child may insist on drinking a big glass of juice, preferring a tall, narrow glass to a short, broad one, even though both might be holding the same amount of juice. As the child grows and is approximately between 7 and 11 years of age, period of middle and late childhood, intuitive thought is replaced by logical thought. This is the stage of concrete operational thought, which is made up of operations, mental actions that allow the child to do mentally what was done physically before. Concrete operations are also mental actions that are reversible.
Reversible, that's good.
In a well-known test, the child is presented with 2 identical balls of clay. One ball is rolled by the experimenter into a long, thin strip, and the other ball remains in its original shape. On being asked which has more clay, the child of 7 or 8 years would answer that both have the same amount of clay. This is because the child imagines the ball rolled into thin strip and then into a ball. That means she is able to imagine reversible mental action on concreterial objects. What do you think a preoperational child would have done? She's likely to focus on only one aspect, length or height. Concrete operations allow the child to focus on different characteristics and not focus on one aspect of the object. This helps the child to appreciate that there are different ways of looking at things, which also results in the decline of her egocentrism. Thinking becomes more flexible, and children can think about alternatives when solving problems or mentally retrace their steps if required.
Yeah, okay.
Even though the preoperational child develops the ability to see relationships between different properties of an object, she cannot do abstract thinking, i.e., she still cannot manipulate ideas in the absence of objects. End quote.
We return to Piaget here. The child has graduated from the sensoromotor stage into what he calls the preoperational stage. They have acquired symbolic thought.
So they can draw a stick figure and understand it represents a human.
Exactly. However, the text outlines 3 major cognitive bugs in their mental software at this age: egocentrism, animism, and centration.
Let's look at the mechanism behind these.
Mm.
Egocentrism isn't just selfishness, right? It's a literal neurological inability to simulate another person's perspective. They think whatever they see and feel is what the entire universe sees and feels. And because they feel alive, they assume everything else is alive too. That's animism. The text uses the example of a child tripping and blaming the road. The road hurt me. They actually attribute intent to concrete.
It's fascinating. And then there is centration, which is basically a failure of working memory and attention. They can only focus on one variable at a time. The classic example in the text is the juice glass.
Oh, I've seen this happen.
Right. You pour the exact same amount of juice into a short, wide glass and a tall, narrow glass. The preoperational child demands the tall glass because they center entirely on the variable of height and completely ignore the variable of width.
No.
They lack the cognitive bandwidth to compute both simultaneously.
But then, between 7 and 11 years old, they transition into the concrete operational stage. They acquire logical thought. They defeat centration.
Wow.
The text uses the famous clay ball experiment. If you roll one ball of clay into a long snake, the concrete operational child knows it's the same amount of clay. They can perform mental reversibility. They can literally imagine rolling the snake back into a ball in their mind.
However, there is a limitation. They're called concrete operations because the logic only works on tangible, real-world objects. If you ask a 9-year-old an abstract, hypothetical algebra question, their logic fails. They need physical anchors.
That makes sense. And alongside this cognitive explosion, society is heavily socializing the child. The text includes a dedicated box on gender roles. I'll read box 3.2 exactly as presented.
Okay, let's hear it.
Quote, is chess a man's game or woman's game or both? Is baking a woman's activity or a man's activity? What about driving, debating, and experimenting in a physics laboratory? Or consider some of the products sold on TV for young men and young women. What do they tell about how girls and boys should be? Psychologists have meticulously researched on whether sex differences exist. Research shows that males have been consistently found to be more aggressive than females. Men perform better than women on tests of sit-ups, short run speeds, and long jumps. Women show better fine eye-hand coordination than men do, and their joints and limbs are more flexible than men's.
Right.
What do you think is the origin of these differences? Are these essential? Or in other words, are women born with certain feminine traits and men with certain masculine traits? Or are these differences the creation of the world we live in? The most powerful roles into which people are socialized are gender roles.
Gender roles.
They specify the range of behaviors which are considered appropriate for males or females. While sex refers to the biological dimension of being male or female, gender refers to the social dimension of being male or female. There are several aspects of gender. Among these, important ones are gender identity of male or female, which most children begin to acquire by the time they are about 3 years old and can accurately label themselves as boys and girls.
By age 3, wow.
As they grow, preferences can be evidenced in their toys and play. A gender role is a set of expectations that prescribes how females and males should think, act, and feel. Parents are important influences on gender socialization, especially in the early years of development. Through rewards and punishments, they induce in children gender-appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. Rewards and punishments. Parents often use rewards and punishments to teach their daughters to be feminine and boys to be masculine. Peer influence is also considered to be a major contributor to gender socialization. Parents restrict school-aged girls more than they restrict school-aged boys and assign boys and girls different types of chores. In everyday interactions, parents give their daughters a kind of dependence training, and their sons a kind of independence training. Media, including cartoons and commercials, are known to perpetuate gender stereotypes. Research on gender stereotypes in commercials shows that across cultures, authority figures in commercials were males, and women were more likely to be shown independent and domestic roles, or women were more likely to sell body products, and men more likely to sell sports products.
The macro system at work.
Once children learn the role of male or female, they organize their world on the basis of gender also. Children's attention and behavior are guided by an internal motivation to conform to gender-based sociocultural standards and stereotypes. Children also actively socialize themselves according to the gender mores of their culture.
Self-socialization.
Once they have internalized gender standards, they begin to expect gender-appropriate behavior from themselves. Young boys may refuse to wear feminine clothes in a fancy dress competition. When playing house, Gergar, girls may refuse to play the father's role. Once they have identified with their own gender, children may model after a powerful cultural figure of the same gender. The gender typing occurs when individuals are ready to encode or organize information along the lines of what is considered appropriate or typical for males and females in a society." End quote.
The source material here is outlining the mechanisms of socialization. It starts by making a strict definitional separation, defining sex as the biological dimension and gender as the social dimension, the expectations a culture holds for how males and females should behave.
And the text identifies three primary agents driving this socialization: parents, peers, and media. The mechanism is operant, conditioning rewards and punishments. Parents reward behavior they view as gender appropriate and punish behavior they view as inappropriate. The text notes this often results in assigning different chores, which it terms dependence training for girls and independence training for boys.
It also points to the macro system we discussed earlier, highlighting how media perpetuates these stereotypes by consistently placing men in authority roles in commercials and women in domestic roles.
But the most psychologically fascinating mechanism the text describes is how the child eventually takes over the process.
Yes, the self-policing.
Once they internalize the societal standards, they actively self-socialize. They no longer need external punishment. Their own brain encodes the gender typing, and they police their own behavior to conform to the culture.
Which is a perfect illustration of how children absorb societal rules, and that leads directly into how they absorb moral rules.
Right. I'll read the text on moral development next. Quote, "Moral development. Another important aspect of the child's development is learning to differentiate between the rightness or wrongness of human acts. The way children come to distinguish right from wrong, to feel guilty, to put themselves in other people's position, and to help others when they are in trouble are all components of moral development. Just as children pass through the various stages of cognitive development, according to Lawrence Kohlberg, they pass through the various stages of moral development, which are age-related.
Kohlberg, yep.
Kohlberg interviewed children in which they were presented with stories in which the characters faced moral dilemmas. Children were asked what the characters in the dilemma should do and why. According to him, children approach thinking about right and wrong differently at different ages.
Different ages, different logic.
The young child, i.e. before 9 years of age, thinks in terms of external authority. According to him, actions are wrong because she is punished and right because she is rewarded. As the child grows, i.e. by early adolescence, she develops moral reasoning through a set of rules of others, such as parents or laws of the society. These rules are accepted by the children as their own. These are internalized in order to be virtuous and to win approval from others, not to avoid punishment. Children view rules as absolute guidelines, which should be followed. Moral thinking at this stage is relatively inflexible. As they grow, they gradually develop a personal moral code." End quote.
Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development really mirrors Piaget's cognitive stages. Kohlberg argues that morality isn't just something you either have or don't have. The very mechanism of how you calculate right and wrong evolves as your brain matures.
So for a child under 9, morality is purely a calculation of consequences.
Right.
If I do this, will an external authority punish me? If yes, it is morally wrong, it is driven by fear, likely orchestrated by the amygdala. They aren't debating ethics. They're literally running a risk assessment.
But as they transition toward adolescence, the mechanism shifts. They begin to internalize the rules of their microsystem and macrosystem. They don't follow rules just to avoid a spanking. They follow them because they want to be perceived as a good person.
They crave the social approval.
Exactly. However, Kohlberg notes that at this stage, moral thinking is incredibly rigid. A rule is a rule with zero flexibility for context.
Wait, so if we establish that older children worship the rules of society just to win approval, what happens to their brains when they eventually realize those rules are flawed? When do they start rebelling and forming that personal moral code the text mentioned?
That rebellion is triggered by the onset of adolescence. Biological puberty fundamentally upgrades their cognitive processing power, allowing them to finally see the gray areas in the rules.
Oh, that makes sense. Let me read the first part of the adolescence section covering these physical and cognitive changes.
Go for it.
Quote, "The term adolescence derives from the Latin word adolescere, meaning to grow into maturity. It is the transitional period in a person's life between childhood and adulthood. Adolescence is commonly defined as the stage of life that begins at the onset of puberty, when sexual maturity or the ability to reproduce is attained. It has been regarded as a period of rapid change, both biologically and psychologically. Though the physical changes that take place during this stage are universal, the social and psychological dimensions of the adolescent's experiences depend on the cultural context.
Yeah.
Physical development, puberty, or sexual maturity marks the end of childhood and signifies the beginning of adolescence, which is characterized by dramatic physical changes in both growth rate and sexual characteristics.
Puberty.
However, puberty is not a sudden event, but is part of a gradual process. The hormones released during puberty result in the development of primary and secondary sexual characteristics. The primary sex characteristics include those directly related to reproduction, and the secondary sex characteristics include features or signs of achieving sexual maturity.
Right.
Pubertal changes in boys are marked by acceleration in growth, facial hair, and changes in voice. In girls, rapid growth in height usually begins about 2 years before menarche, the onset of menstruation. The growth spurt generally begins at the age of 12 or 13 for boys and at the age of 10 or 11 for girls. Cognitive developmental changes. Adolescents' thought becomes more abstract, logical, and idealistic. They become more capable of examining their own thoughts, others' thoughts, and what others are thinking about them. Adolescents' developing ability to reason gives them a new level of cognitive and social awareness.
Metacognition, thinking about thinking.
Piaget believed that formal operational thought appears between the age of 11 and 15. During this stage, adolescent thinking expands beyond actual concrete experiences, and they begin to think more in abstract terms and reason about them. In addition to being abstract, adolescent thought is also idealistic.
Idealistic, yes.
Adolescents begin to think about ideal characteristics for themselves and others, and compare themselves and others with these ideal standards. Piaget called this type of logical thinking hypothetical deductive reasoning. Logical thought also influences the development of moral reasoning. Social rules are not considered as absolute standards, and moral thinking shows some flexibility. The adolescent recognizes alternative moral courses, explores options, and then decides on a personal moral code. For example, should I smoke, as everyone I know does? Is it ethical to copy answers in the examination?
Right.
This also lends the possibility of adolescents not following society's norms if they conflict with personal code of ethics. Adolescents also develop a special kind of egocentrism. According to David Elkind, imaginary audience and personal fable are two components of adolescents' egocentrism.
These two are crucial.
Imaginary audience is adolescents' belief that others are as preoccupied with them as they are about themselves. They imagine that people are always noticing them and are observing each and every behavior of theirs. Imagine a boy who thinks that all will notice the ink spot on his shirt, or a girl with a pimple feels. All people would think how bad her skin is.
The imaginary audience.
It is this imaginary audience which makes him extremely self-conscious. The personal fable is part of the adolescent's egocentrism that involves their sense of uniqueness. Adolescents' sense of uniqueness makes them think that no one understands them or their feelings. For example, an adolescent girl thinks that none can sense the hurt that she feels because of being betrayed by a friend. It is quite common to hear the adolescent say to the parents, "You don't understand me." To retain their sense of personal uniqueness, they may weave stories filled with fantasy around them to create a world that is away from reality. Personal fables are often part of adolescent diaries. End quote.
The biological trigger for all of this is puberty. The endocrine system floods the body with hormones, developing primary sex characteristics for reproduction and secondary characteristics like facial hair or growth spurts. But what those hormones do to the brain is arguably far more dramatic.
Yeah, Piaget calls this the final stage, formal operational thought. The teenager is finally free from the physical constraints of concrete objects. They can think abstractly. They can manipulate hypothetical ideas in their mind. And because they can conceptualize hypothetical perfection, The text notes, they become deeply idealistic. They compare reality against a utopian ideal.
And that idealism shatters their rigid childhood morality. They realize society's rules are imperfect, and they begin to construct the personal moral code that Kohlberg theorized about.
But with all this new computing power comes a devastating social glitch. The text introduces David Elkind's concepts of adolescent egocentrism, the imaginary audience, and the personal fable.
Yes.
The imaginary audience is the biological conviction that everyone is constantly watching and judging you. The text uses the example of a pimple. The teenager believes the entire school is fixated on their flaw. To put this into a real-world context for you, the listener, think about the modern teenager. If human biology already wires them to feel like they are on a stage with a million critics, imagine what happens when you hand them an Instagram account.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Social media must absolutely weaponize the imaginary audience mechanism, making the stakes feel like life or death.
It creates an intense, sustained cognitive load of self-consciousness. And it is paired with the personal fable, the belief that their emotional experience is entirely unique in the history of human existence.
Right.
When a teenager screams, "You don't understand me," they aren't just being dramatic. Their neurological architecture genuinely prevents them from realizing that every other human being has felt heartbreak or embarrassment.
That intense self-focus leads to the primary crisis of adolescence, figuring out who they actually are. I'll read the text on identity and the major concerns of this period.
Go.
Quote, forming an identity. You must have sought answers to questions such as, oh, I'm a. Which subjects should I study? Do I believe in God? The answers to all these questions involve the quest to define one's sense of self or the search for identity. Identity is who you are and what your values, commitments, and beliefs are. The primary task of adolescence is to establish an identity separate from the parents. During adolescence, a detachment process enables the individual to develop a personalized set of beliefs that are uniquely her or his own. In the process of achieving an identity, the adolescent could experience conflict with parents and within herself or himself.
Detachment causes conflict.
Those adolescents who can cope with the conflicting identities develop a new sense of self. Adolescents who are not able to cope with this identity crisis are confused. This identity confusion, according to Erickson, can lead to individuals isolating themselves from peers and family, or they may lose their identity in the crowd.
Identity confusion.
Adolescents, on one hand, may desire independence, but may also be afraid of it and show a great deal of dependence on their parents. Some major concerns. As adults, when we reflect on our adolescent years and recall the conflicts, uncertainties, occasional loneliness, group pressures, we feel it was definitely a vulnerable period. Delinquency. Delinquency refers to a variety of behaviors, ranging from socially unacceptable behavior, legal offenses, to criminal acts. Examples include truancy, running away from home, stealing or burglary, or acts of vandalism. Adolescents with delinquency and behavioral problems tend to have a negative self-identity, decreased trust, and low level of achievement.
Okay.
Delinquency is often associated with low parental support, inappropriate discipline, and family discord. However, most delinquent children do not remain delinquent forever. Change in their peer group, becoming more aware of their social responsibilities, and developing feelings of self-worth help in reduction of delinquent behavior.
That's the optimistic part.
Substance abuse. Adolescent years are especially vulnerable to smoking, alcohol, and drug abuse. Some adolescents take recourse to smoking and drugs as a way of coping with stress. This can interfere with the development of coping skills and responsible decision-making. The reasons for smoking and drug use could be peer pressure and the adolescent's need to be accepted by the group, or desire to act more like adults. Eating disorders. Adolescents' obsession with self, living in fantasy world, and peer comparisons lead to certain conditions where they become obsessed with their own bodies. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder that involves relentless pursuit of thinness through starvation. It is quite common to see adolescents eliminate certain foods from their diets or to eat slimming foods only. The media also projects thinness as the most desirable image, and copying such fashionable image of thinness leads to anorexia nervosa. Bulimia is another form of an eating disorder in which the individual follows a binge and purge eating pattern. The bulimic goes on an eating binge, then purges by self-induced vomiting or using a laxative at times, alternating it with fasting. Anorexia nervosa and bulimia are primarily female disorders more common in urban families." End quote.
So we revisit Erickson here. Remember, in infancy, the crisis was trust versus mistrust. In adolescence, the psychological crisis is identity versus identity confusion.
Right. And the text states the primary task is to establish an identity separate from the parents. There's a deep evolutionary imperative here, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Biologically, they are preparing to leave the nest, so they must psychologically sever the umbilical cord of their parents' belief systems. This detachment process naturally causes intense conflict. If they fail to forge a unique identity, Erickson warns they fall into confusion, either isolating themselves completely or blindly adopting the identity of whatever crowd they fall into.
And that desperation to fit into a crowd, combined with the stress of the imaginary audience, leaves them highly vulnerable to the three major concerns the text highlights: delinquency, substance abuse, and eating disorders.
Let's look at the mechanism driving these. The text notes delinquency, vandalism, truancy is linked to low parental support and negative self-identity, but it also offers a surprisingly optimistic note. Most don't remain delinquent.
Right.
A shift in the microsystem, specifically a change in peer group, can often correct the trajectory. Substance abuse is framed largely as a faulty coping mechanism for stress and a tool for peer acceptance.
And then the text explicitly details eating disorders, connecting them directly back to the adolescent obsession with self and peer comparisons. It defines anorexia nervosa as the relentless pursuit of thinness through starvation, heavily influenced by media imagery in the macro system.
Yeah.
It defines bulimia as a cycle of binge eating followed by purging. The text notes these are primarily female disorders that are more common in urban families. The mechanism here is often a desperate attempt to assert control over a changing body when the rest of their identity feels chaotic.
Which brings us to the final massive chapter of human life. We're going to break the final text on adulthood and old age into three distinct sections to give it the weight it deserves. I'll read the first segment on early and middle adulthood.
Okay, let's do it.
Quote, an adult is generally defined as someone who is responsible, mature, self-supporting, and well-integrated into society. In early adulthood, two major tasks are exploring the possibilities for adult living and developing a stable life structure. The 20s represent the novice phase of adult development.
The novice phase, yeah.
Gradually, a transition from dependence to independence should occur. This could be marked by an image of the kind of life the young person wants, especially in terms of marriage and a career and work. Earning a living, choosing an occupation, and developing a career are important themes for people in their 20s and 30s. Entering work life is a challenging event in anyone's life.
Very challenging.
Marriage, parenthood, and family. The adjustments that young adults have to make when entering a marriage relate to knowing the other person if not known earlier, coping with each other's likes, dislikes, tastes, and choices. If both the partners are working, adjustments are required regarding sharing and performing roles and responsibilities at home.
Adjustment is the key word.
In addition to getting married, becoming a parent can be a difficult and stressful transition in young adults, even though it is usually accompanied by the feeling of love for the baby. Physical changes during middle ages are caused by maturational changes in the body. Though individuals may vary in the rate at which these changes occur, almost all middle-aged people notice gradual deterioration in some aspects of their physical functioning, such as decline in vision, sensitivity to glare, hearing loss, and changes in physical appearance, for example, wrinkles, gray hair or thinning of hair, weight gain.
The physical decline.
Do cognitive abilities change during adulthood? It is believed that some cognitive abilities decline with age while others do not. Decline in memory is more in tasks involving long-term memory than short-term memory. Memory tends to show greater decline, while wisdom may improve with age. End quote.
We return to the concept of developmental tasks here. In early adulthood, the societal checklist demands total independence, achieved primarily through two avenues: career and marriage.
The psychological load of these tasks is immense. You are attempting to integrate a partner's entire worldview and habits into your own microsystem while simultaneously navigating the stress of a career in your exosystem. And then parenthood arrives, which the text accurately describes as a difficult and stressful transition, despite the love involved. It fundamentally and permanently rewrites your daily ecology.
And as you navigate these social stressors, you hit middle age, and the biological hardware begins its inevitable, genetically programmed maturation, or in this case, deterioration. The text lists the physical declines: vision, hearing, hair thinning.
But the cognitive changes are what fascinate me. As we discussed earlier with the lifespan perspective, it is multidirectional. The text notes that tasks involving long-term memory begin to show decline. The retrieval speed slows down. Yet wisdom may improve. The brain literally sacrifices raw processing speed for better pattern recognition.
Now let's look at how society handles the final stages of that trajectory.
I'll read the text on old age. Quote, Old age, just when old age begins, is not easy to determine. Traditionally, the age of retirement was linked to old age. Now that people are living longer, age of retiring from work is changing, and the cutoff point for the definition of old age is moving upward.
Right, it's moving.
Some of the challenges, which the aged have to cope with, include retirement, widowhood, illness, or death in the family. Older adults also need to adjust to changes in the family structure and new roles, grandparenting, that have to be learned. Children usually are busy in their careers and families and may set up independent homes.
The empty nest?
Older adults may depend on their children for financial support and to overcome their loneliness after children have moved out. This might trigger off feelings of hopelessness and depression in some people. In old age, feeling of loss of energy and dwindling of health and financial assets lead to insecurity and dependency.
Mm-hmm.
The elderly tend to look towards others to lean on and to care for them. Indian culture favors dependency of elderly on their children for old age needs caring. In fact, parents in most Oriental cultures rear their children with the fond hope that they will care for them during old age.
That's a crucial cultural difference.
It is important to give the elderly a sense of security and belonging, a feeling that people care for them, especially in the time of crisis, and to remember that we all have to grow old one day, end quote.
This paragraph beautifully highlights how the macro system, the culture, dictates the psychological experience of aging.
First, it points out that the very definition of old age is a moving target because medical technology has extended the lifespan, delaying retirement. But the psychological challenge of the empty nest is profound.
It really is.
The children move out to execute their own early adulthood developmental tasks, leaving the older adult isolated. The text notes this can trigger hopelessness and depression due to declining health and financial assets.
But notice the cultural pivot there. The text explicitly contrasts the Western ideal of total independence with the Indian and broader Oriental cultural model. In these cultures, dependency in old age is not viewed as a failure, it is the designed expectation. Parents rear children with the explicit sociocultural contract that the children will provide care in old age. The psychological burden of dependency is entirely altered by the cultural context it occurs in.
Which brings us to the final, inevitable transition. I'll read the last block of text on death. Quote, although death is more likely to occur in late adulthood, death can come at any point in development. The deaths, especially of children and younger adults, are often perceived to be more tragic than those of others. The death of a spouse is usually seen as the most difficult loss. People in different cultures view death differently. In the Gan culture in our country, it is believed that death is caused by magic and demon. In the Tanala culture of Madagascar, natural forces are thought to cause death. Human development, as you have read in this chapter, thus, helps you to understand the influence of various factors in an individual's lifetime. End quote.
The text ends by reiterating the power of belief systems. The biological fact of death is universal. A heart stops beating. But the cognitive and socio-emotional processing of that event is entirely dictated by the culture.
The text notes the death of a spouse is often the most difficult loss, which makes sense ecologically. It is the catastrophic collapse of your innermost microsystem.
Exactly.
But the meaning assigned to death varies wildly. The Gan culture attributes it to magic and demons, the Tanala culture to natural forces. The biological ending is the same, but the narrative constructed around it is vastly different.
And that is the ultimate thesis of the text. From the moment of conception, when teratogens might slip through the placenta, to the cognitive leaps of Piaget's stages, to the social pressures of Erikson's identity crises, human development is never just one thing. It is the constant, inescapable collision of our biology, our minds, and our environment.
We have covered immense ground today. We trace the invisible architecture from a single microscopic cell carrying a genotype, through the layered ecological systems of Bronfenbrenner and Sinha, through the rigid moral calculations of Kohlberg, all the way to the shifting cultural definitions of old age.
It is a staggering journey to view laid out sequentially, and it reinforces the fact that you are an ongoing project. You're constantly reacting to the context around you.
Which leads me to the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Since development is highly plastic and lifelong meaning, your brain and your behaviors retain the capacity to adapt right up until the end. Your environment is still shaping you today. What is one small, deliberate change you can make to your own microsystem today that will force your operating system to keep developing tomorrow? Think about that. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Goodbye, and keep exploring.